Good morning to our speakers and distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic community, the military, the academe, and think tanks. I am Joyce Reyes, and I will be your host for today. And welcome to our forum on navigating asymmetric threats, cross-regional strategies for Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Now, this event is organized by the Strat-Based Institute in partnership with the European Council on Foreign Relations. This event is also a hybrid event, so thank you very much to everyone who's here with us this morning in this venue, and thank you as well to everyone who's watching us live via Zoom and via Facebook Live. Across Europe and the Indo-Pacific, security challenges are intensifying, from military buildups and dual-use technologies to gray zone tactics that blur the line between war and peace. Flashpoints like the war in Ukraine and tensions in the West Philippine Sea underscore the urgent need for deeper dialogue and stronger partnerships. And today's gathering of experts, officials, and diplomats aim to strengthen cooperation and build trust in facing asymmetric challenges. Now, this forum is also part of the Observatory of Multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific, a multi-year research program supported by the leading European institutions and the French Ministry of the Armed Forces, aimed at deepening Europe's understanding of Indo-Pacific dynamics. And to officially begin today's program, may we call on Mr. James Crabtree, Distinguished Visiting Fellow of the European Council on Foreign Relations, to deliver his opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Secretary Anno, distinguished ambassadors, visitors, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'll keep my remarks very brief. I just wanted to echo how important a topic this seems at this particular moment, whether you're from Europe or the wider Indo-Pacific or here in the Philippines. Ever since the Ukraine war, it has become almost a commonplace of discussions in this part of the world or in Europe that the two theaters, the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic, are increasingly interlinked and indivisible. But actually, you need to find specific areas where this is true. And I think there are almost no areas that are more true of this than the one that we will be discussing throughout the course of today, namely the sub-threshold gray zone threat. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, those of us who live in Europe have been watching with rising alarm at the events on our eastern frontier with Russian drones in Poland, Russian helicopters in Estonia. You know, we've had the heritage of cable cutting in the Baltic Sea. And here in the Philippines, we saw only yesterday another example of the gray zone activity that your military and your Navy and your Coast Guard have to cope with on a regular basis, not to mention rising incidents of the threats to cable infrastructure and other examples in Taiwan and elsewhere around the region. So I think this is a very fruitful moment for a group like this to gather in Manila and to begin to have this conversation, to share common experiences, to understand the nature of the threat environment, and to come up with best practices where our governments and yours can think about the toolkit that we need to manage these threats now and into the future. I think it is an area where more knowledge exchange and best practice exchange, both at the level of government and at the level of the think tank and research community, can be really fruitful. So, I mean, with that, I think it has been an inspired decision of our friends from France to help support this series of events under the DGRIS and with the support of the French Ministry of Armed Forces. And so, representing ECFR and the wider consortium, I wanted to recognize that and say thank you for their support. As anyone who works in think tanks knows, you can't do think tank work without money. So we're very, very grateful to them. Grateful also to the Ambassador of France for hosting at her elegant residence a small delegation of those who were part of the conference last night, and for her remarks. I'm especially grateful both to Secretary Anno, for, I know, exceptionally busy at the moment and at all times, for coming to share remarks with us. And I'm sure all of you will be keen to hear the overview of how the Philippines and President Marcos's administration are thinking about this pressing challenge as the Philippines thinks about the grey zone, and also to Rear Admiral Piñe, who amongst a group who've come from far and wide, probably wins the prize for coming furthest, from coming all the way from Tahiti. So we're very grateful to you, Rear Admiral, and also look forward to hearing France's military experience with dealing with some of these issues, both in this part of the world and elsewhere. The final thing I would say is that we, as ECFR, have been very lucky in this endeavor to have a partner as well connected intellectually on the pulse and as well organized as Stratbase. And so both to the Stratbase team, who've done a huge amount to bring together such a high quality event, and to Prof. Dindo, we wanted to extend our thanks. And let me hand over to Dindo to make his opening remarks. But thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to an excellent day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crabtree. And of course, it's also our pleasure to partner with ECFR in this very meaningful endeavor. All right? And to also deliver another opening message, let us all welcome the Stratbase Institute President, Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you to our dear Secretary Anyo. Thank you to members of our government, to the diplomatic community, and to our supporters, both in media, the think tank space in the Philippines, even in the private sector. In the past 12 years, since 2012, Stratbase have always wanted to see the world from what we call a geopolitical and asymmetric challenges that we face. And we have devoted time, effort, engagements to bring this out to the Filipino public. Our team has focused on traditional security issues, non-traditional security issues, published works, and even asymmetric challenges. Now, as we discuss further challenges within the so-called Indo-Pacific, I reminded our team of how I see the Indo-Pacific. When you speak of the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, I see an archipelago called the Republic of the Philippines, in the middle of the Indo-Pacific region. I believe, and I've argued in the past, that we are of strategic importance within the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. I speak of standing up January 2013 when we filed a case, standing up for a rules-based order, using the UNCLOS decision to stand up for maritime security, building cooperation. And now, as we face a world driven by data, you'd see how important the eastern seas of the Philippines and the western seas. I speak of trade flows passing through the West Philippine Sea. I speak of submarine cables passing through the eastern seas, the western seas, to connect the world to the Indo-Pacific region. And maybe because of that, we have our northern neighbor continuing its coercive, assertive actions against our right in an exclusive economic zone. And I'm referring to China. I've said that so many times, and I will continue to say that, publicly, locally, and internationally. We have seen it in TV, thanks to the effort of our government to be transparent about it. Before, I had to harness satellite pictures just to bring it out in public. This was from 2016, to tell the Filipino people that we have a problem in our seas And as an archipelagic nation, that is our territory. But now we're also experiencing security or asymmetric security challenges in cyberspace. Here I speak of cyber attacks through persuasive technologies, deepfakes, AI-driven content, malign influence, disinformation campaigns. Daily, we face these challenges. But think tanks like ours, with the help of our government agencies, with the help of the diplomatic community, will try to push back, fight back, and even the private sector with their cybersecurity capacity. And at the core of this is the belief that we live in a rules-based international order. Even in our own government, in 2011, 2012, I knew people did not realize that we can stand up against China. And we did. We used this opportunity to thank people who believed on the power of law, the great equalizer. I speak of our late chairman, Albert Rosario. I speak of Justice Carpio, who's with us today. Believing that makes us equalize, that the so-called 10-dash line, when we fought this, it was 9-dash line. Then it became 10. That's why India is our friend now. But still, we stand up. And as we stood up for this, we saw this government, the Marcos Jr. government, though it's delayed, took some time because of challenges, passed a law that defines what our maritime zones are, our archipelagic sea lanes. The Philippines, since 2022, and most especially since 2023, is bolstering its external defense through a two-pronged strategy, I believe. We've been building stronger national defense capabilities and deepening alliances with like-minded nations. The future of peace, stability, and prosperity will depend on sustained Europe and Indo-Pacific economic cooperation, security cooperation. Certainly, the economic and security challenges that we face are daunting. But while there are risks, there are also opportunities for cooperation and mutual reinforcement. And we have seen this really step up and accelerate since 2023. Allow me activities after activities, engagements after engagements happening with our friends from Europe and our own government. I need so many slides for this purpose, but it's a way for us to thank our friends from Europe. And I hope these slides gets longer, gets firmer in terms of actual cooperations. We navigate an increasingly complex geostrategic landscape. But one thing we have in common is shared values that we can bring together with shared resources and expertise. I was thinking of my column next week, and I started with this, making use of this line, and I wanted to share in advance to my column next week. I said, the nations and the people of Europe and the Indo-Pacific share more things than one might imagine. We may be halfway across the world from each other, but changing times have narrowed the gaps and have intertwined our present and our future. Security and prosperity are our common goals, and both regions are equally driven to achieve this for their people. As geopolitical opportunities are actual risks today, I believe that I will continue to advocate our institute with the help of our partners, both public, private, the diplomatic community. We'll try to bring the state, the private sector, and the international community together, because we can set the standard for effective multilateral engagements, uphold sovereignty and freedom of navigation, and provide a model for addressing complex security challenges in an interconnected world, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Again, good morning and thank you for joining us. And let's expect a fruitful discussion the whole day.
Thank you very much. Very insightful opening message from Professor Manhit. So before we proceed to our next speaker, allow me to recognize some very special guests who are joining us this morning. First, we have with us today the Ambassador of France to the Philippines, Her Excellency Marie Fontanelle. Also with us is the Ambassador of Canada in the Philippines, His Excellency Mr. David Hartman. Also with us, the Ambassador of Brunei to the Philippines, Her Excellency Megawati Manan. Also, the Ambassador of Belgium in the Philippines, Ms. Vladislava Yordanova. We also have with us today the Deputy Ambassador of the European Union to the Philippines, Ms. Agata Novica. Also, the Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of Poland here in the Philippines, Ms. Anna Kurzak-Danel. Also, the Deputy Head of Mission of Switzerland, Mr. Hans Christian Baumann. And the Deputy Head of Mission of Malaysia, Norjufri Nizar Edrus. The Deputy Head of Mission of the Norwegian Embassy, Mr. Geir Michelsen. All right, and we have the DCM of Italy, Mr. Giovanni Porco. Oh, there. All right, and then from the government, we have from the National Security Council, Deputy Director General Nestor Jerico. And from the NSC as well, Assistant Director General Cornelio Valencia. From the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, or NICA, we have Deputy Director General Ace Acedillo. And from the Office of American Affairs of the Department of Foreign Affairs, we have Deputy Assistant Secretary Vanessa Bagogliona. And from the military, from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, representative from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Brigadier General Medel Aguilar. All right, and we have representatives also, of course, from the Air Force, Navy, and the Philippine Coast Guards. Thank you very much for joining us today. Again, another round of applause, please, for our dear guests today. All right, now we have a keynote message from the command. All right, sorry, hold on. Okay, sorry. I am pleased to welcome our next speaker for this morning, who will deliver the keynote message for this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all give a warm round of applause to the National Security Advisor and Director General of the National Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Eduardo Año.
Please take your seat. Honorable members of the Diplomatic Corps present, His Excellency David Hartman, Ambassador of Canada to the Philippines, Her Excellency Marie Fontanelle, Ambassador of France to the Philippines, His Excellency, Her Excellency Vladislava Yordanova, Ambassador Designate of Belgium to the Philippines, Her Excellency Megawati Datu Paduka Haji Mawan, Brunei Darussalam, Professor Victor Andres Manhit, President of Strat-Based Institute, Mr. James Crabtree, Distinguished Visiting Fellow, European Council on Foreign Relations, Rear Admiral Guillaume Panchet, Commander French Armed Forces in the Pacific, former Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, other officials and representatives from the different national government agencies present, distinguished panels, foreign dignitaries, military attachés, representatives from the academe and private sector, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. From the depths of our seas to our limitless airspace, from a sacrosanct and rule-based global order to the domains of cyberspace, regional landscapes are continually disturbed today, creating geopolitical stress and complexities. Just a few days ago, drone incursion into the Polish airspace made headlines. On the surface, it seems that this is an ordinary violation of Poland's sovereignty, until investigations highlighted that these drones, which traveled hundreds of miles into the Polish territory, are capable of carrying ammunitions. If incidents like this, along with multi-domain swarming of drones and weaponization of unmanned systems, do not alarm the world, we wonder what awaits the security of our boundless airspace. On one hand, how many of us here are aware that we are facing a crippling paralysis of sea lines of communications due to multiple undersea cable sabotage that are being operated deep down our oceans? Let us take the incidents in the Baltic Sea and off the coast of Taiwan. I surmise we are all aware of the fact that cable breakages may cripple critical infrastructure for global communications, internet connections, and societal functions that link our continents. Critical infrastructures and communications networks have also been frequently under threat, as cyber domain now becomes a prime target. Incidents have become so numerous, including state-sponsored cyber operations, ransomware attacks, and using cryptocurrencies, cyberspace typhoons, and advanced persistent threats targeting critical sectors. How can we forget the year when Texas-based company SolarWinds rolled out a supposedly software update that was then used as a vehicle for a massive cyber attack against the United States? About 100 companies and a dozen government agencies were successfully compromised in the attacking incident. And just recently, in yet another coercive attempt to advance its interest, a neighbor has bared its plan to build a national nature reserve in the Scarborough Shoal, or Bajo de Masinloc in the West Philippine Sea. Among other things, such attempts tell the world that respect for international law and rule-based order is now being put to the side to give way to self-serving and coercive domestic laws. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Indo-Pacific region, as the global fulcrum of power constantly shifts, similar challenges have emerged in evolving dimensions. Some of these threats move beyond conventional warfare. They are now being waged asymmetrically, tending to be irregular but systematic. In recent years, as the Indo-Pacific region becomes the center of geopolitical and geostrategic shifts, a host of asymmetric threats has been observed, impacting a global order that has become harder to navigate. They come in the forms of cyber attacks and digital espionage, targeting infrastructure, financial systems and defense, and foreign information manipulation and interference with its coordinated campaigns to spread disinformation, polarize societies, and disrupt elections. Then there's economic coercion, with the use of trade dependencies and critical supply chains as political leverage, and the sabotage of undersea cables disrupting communications and data flow, which has become hard to attribute and often used as gray zone warfare. The weaponization of resources where earths and critical minerals are exploited to pressure economies has also become prevalent. All these threats are no longer confined to the regions. They now transcend borders, exploiting openness, connectivity, and democratic systems. They are evidently interconnected and global in nature, calling for concreteness and urgency in our collective actions and for deeper, more committed, and more sustained partnerships and understanding. I say this with certainty. No single country can counter and combat them alone. Yes, asymmetric threats demand symmetric unity and systematic actions. Our alignment of efforts and reinforcement of unity must buttress current geopolitical structure and global power dynamics. As the challenges we face are interconnected, we must use the same interconnectedness to confront them. In such respect, I believe that cross-regional strategies should not be about exclusion or confrontation. Instead, they should be about providing alternatives on how we approach and decide credible choice in trade, development, infrastructure, and security, while ensuring that no country is left with only one coercive dependency. Among other important alliances, strategic partnerships, and cooperations, Europe and the Indo-Pacific are no longer seen as distant frontiers. In navigating these issues and predicaments, they are now intertwined pillars of global security. We recognize that security, stability, and prosperity in Europe are directly shaped by events in the Indo-Pacific, more particularly in terms of supply chain shocks, freedoms of navigation, and maritime disputes. Given the importance of Indo-Pacific as the world's strategic and economic center, Europe has realized and acknowledged that instability in the Indo-Pacific already impacts European stability. As reflected in Europe's 2021 strategy of cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, what happens in Asia resonates in Europe's stability and growth. Our interconnected security also presents to us that instability in one theater ripples across the other. For instance, events in Ukraine reverberate in the Taiwan Strait. In the same vein, tensions in the South China Sea, in the West Philippine Sea, echo in Europe's energy and trade networks. On the other hand, Europe's vulnerabilities brought about by Russia's war in Ukraine, hybrid warfare, energy blackmail, and sabotage of undersea cables all underscore the reality of asymmetric threats. Europe's experience in countering and addressing such threats offers lessons for Indo-Pacific partners, highlighting a prospective partnership between our regions. Along with Europe's 2021 strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific that highlights the pillars of sustainability, connectivity, and maritime security, Japan's engagement, which now views Europe as an essential partner to balance and to reinforce multilateralism, is a pivotal step to forging cross-regional alignment in the Indo-Pacific to counter these asymmetric threats. Australia's approach of diversifying partnerships beyond the US-China binary and deepening ties with Japan, Germany, and Europe, Association of Southeast Asian Nations Centrality, which provides an inclusive and multilateral framework that prevents escalation and sustains dialogue, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Asia-Pacific for Cooperation, which scales up the growing strategic alignment among NATO, Australia, Japan, Republic of Korea, and New Zealand. These point us to the direction of our shared objectives of resilience, deterrence, and conflict prevention. Solidarity, burden sharing, and innovation are indeed crucial to maintaining deterrence and stability. There are critical areas of cooperation in which we can frame and fortify our partnerships as an opportunity, not only to defend our regions against threats, but also to build a more inclusive, resilient, and peaceful global order. European naval deployments in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, with participating countries such as France, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, are evidence of burden sharing in the fields of defense and security. Defense industrial cooperations in terms of pooling resources, developing of advanced capabilities, and interoperability in exercises must be bolstered. Greater access to Europe's funding schemes for defense innovations, such as partnerships benefiting the Indo-Pacific allies, must be pushed forward, like the Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia, or the ASEWA program. Our regions must also link arms in developing and employing joint countermeasures against cyber intrusion and foreign interference and malign influence campaigns, especially now that the domains of cyberspace are greatly exploited to advance interest, spread threats, and sow disorder in our societies. We can begin from sharing best practices in protecting elections and democratic institutions from manipulation, and strengthening collaboration on cognitive warfare resilience. It is also high time that we develop our economic and supply chain resilience through diversification of critical minerals and rare earths. We can work towards reducing dependency on a single supplier, ensuring that we have multiple alternatives. We can shore up as well our cooperation in energy, security, critical infrastructure, and advanced technologies. Shared stakes and closer coordination in freedom of navigation and stability, especially across the troubled and turbulent waters of the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, and East China Sea, should be our main armors in conflict prevention and diplomacy. Let us put in mind that no ASEAN member states seek conflict, but all face the risk of consequences of escalation. Exploring other diplomatic alternatives such as developing assistance, education, infrastructure, and health, which offer partners choices beyond dependence on a single country such as China, is something we can work on together. And finally, both regions should work side by side to reinforce ASEAN's convening power. Though they are imperfect, ASEAN-centric mechanisms are crucial for dialogue and de-escalation. This can be done through coordination with a group of 20, the BRICS, the United Nations, and other unilateral frameworks. As we forge a shared future, I must emphasize the importance of sustained engagement and long-term cooperation between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Regular cross-regional platforms ensure our momentum. But going forward, they need to be proactive, institutionalized, and enduring. The way ahead for us should be about innovation strategy and harnessing new technologies as tools for collective security. Despite unprecedented risk, I am optimistic that our regions have the resources, the capacities, and willpower to shape the future. And amidst the authoritarian pushback and domination by some great powers, and in an era where rules are seen as constraints rather than as shields, I am assured that Europe and the Indo-Pacific will stand as guardians of the values we deeply share, that of democracy, multilateralism, transparency, freedom of navigation, and free trade. Together, let us transform shared challenges into shared opportunities and shape a future defined not by division and uncertainty, but by peace, resilience, and cooperation. I hope today's sharing of perspectives, alignment of strategies, and reinforcement of solidarity between and among our nations will soon translate into actionable solutions. Thank you very much to your kind attention. And once again, good morning to everybody.
Thank you very much, Secretary Eduardo Año, for that very informative and inspiring speech. To echo the Secretary, he said that asymmetric threats require symmetric unity and systemic cooperation. And that is exactly why we are all here today. The Strat-Based Institute has always believed in strategic collaboration amongst like-minded nations externally and even internally. We've always believed in a whole-of-society approach. That is why every time we have a chance to gather everyone from the government, from the diplomatic community, from the academe think tanks, and the private sector, we see to it that we gather everyone and hear from everyone. All right. Thank you very much again, Secretary. And we have another keynote message, this time from the commander of the French Armed Forces in the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rear Admiral Guillaume Pinier.
Secretary Agnew, Excellencies, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, on behalf of the French Ministry of Armed Forces, I would like to warmly thank the Strat-Based Institute for hosting us today and the European Council of Foreign Relations for the quality of this conference and its program. Thank you all to all the participants for taking part in today's conference and for confronting your respective expertise to deepen our common analysis. It's a real pleasure for me to open humbly the 5th conference of the Observatory of Multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. The Observatory, which brings together some of the French, European best researchers on geostrategy here in the Indo-Pacific with their colleagues, is the result of a long-term project led by the Directorate General for International Relations and Strategy within the Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces, which is the policy department of our ministry. Between them and the Strat-Based and the European Council for Foreign Relations. The aim of this observatory that just released a report 2 weeks ago is to support and foster friends and international research on the future of multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific and try to highlight multilateral solutions to be converted into policies. We also want to build bridges between Europe and Indo-Pacific researchers, notably through this series of conferences that has taken us to New Delhi, Tokyo, Paris, Manila today, and Brussels next November. The European Council of Foreign Relations publishes today a useful research paper on strengthening the ties between Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific theaters through the coordination on asymmetric threats. This study will serve as the basis for our exchanges today. To address the issue, the topic of the day, I would like to share 3 remarks. First, the use of asymmetric threats as a strategic tool today. Second, France, which is both a European resident nation and a resident nation of the Indo-Pacific, how France is determined and committed to face these threats. And then 3, in order to do so, I will give a highlight on our updated national strategic review and updated Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been released recently and give us tools to thwart these threats. So let's start by my first comments. More than ever, asymmetric threats have become a strategic tool. In Europe and Indo-Pacific, traditional security challenges are increasingly present, and the rule-based international security architecture is challenged in numerous ways, as it was described. Let me be more accurate. The use of force in state disputes is now uninhibited. A technological race is taking place in parallel. AI, drone, space, information, cyber, electronic spectrum adds new areas of confrontation while we still have to keep our conventional power. Economic and legal instruments, as well as private sectors, non-state actors, are used to blur the lines between war and peace, between coercion and legitimacy. This unlimited use of these asymmetric strategies that have been already touched, they are also spoken with hybrid gray zone activities. ICAD are drawing a trend to replace the existing international framework defined and set after the Second World War. It is a threat to our economic, democratic, political model, individual freedom, freedom of our nations and people. In this regard, Europe and the Indo-Pacific are flashpoints for global ongoing crises. Maybe we should mention the Middle East, which is also a hotspot now on the way, of our connection. In Ukraine, every day, critical civilian infrastructure are being targeted. Online platforms are playing an increasingly worrying role in this context. Shared common space, airspace, very high altitude, exoatmospheric and extra-atmospheric space, deep seabed, that was just mentioned previously, maritime areas, cyberspace, information domain have become the focus of a renewed competition. The stakes surrounding unrestricted access to maritime routes on airspace have increased as certain actors use deliberate and hybrid anti-access strategies. So we are facing an intertwining of crisis zone between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. These two zones are interdependent, maybe more since Russia illegally waged war against Ukraine with the support of the PRK. The need for a deeper dialogue between partners has never been more urgent, as is the strengthening of cross-regional cooperation, which is the topic of today's discussion. This leads me to my second message. So France is a single European nation of the Indo-Pacific, and as then, fully committed to face this asymmetric threat in the region and promote rule-based international order. So France is a resident nation of the Indo-Pacific. 7 of French overseas territories are spread across the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean and are home for 1.6 million French citizens. It is therefore our responsibility to guarantee the protection of our citizens, sovereignty of our territories, integrity of our EEZ. In the Pacific, 70% of the French EEZ is in the Pacific, and when you come to Indo-Pacific, it's 90%. And the preservation of these resources, the preservation of supply flows and communication slides and regional stability is paramount. European economy and France's mainland economy and prosperity is also dependent from economic flows, where there are digital, maritime, air, and any kind of flows. And as an Indo-Pacific nation, France shares a common destiny with the region. We are committed to defend an open, secure, and inclusive area, free from all forms of coercion and based on respect of international law, multilateralism, and national sovereignties. In this context, the French armed forces are doing their part of the job by being involved and committed in facing asymmetric threats in the Indo-Pacific, in close cooperation with other departments and French ministries. This commitment relies on a permanent military station forward force, 7,000 soldiers stationed here in the Indo-Pacific, and reinforced by regular deployments of upper-end capabilities from mainland France, with at least 2 deployments per year since 2020. For instance, in 2025, our flagship, the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, deployed in the Indo-Pacific. The deployment of our most strategic assets illustrates France's ability to produce multi-domain effects across the region. And Charles de Gaulle visited the Philippines, and thank you, Philippines, for hosting them. And this is a nice memory. This was a premiere for them, and this, I hope there will be another opportunity for such visits. The French Armed Forces also developed military cooperation and integrity with partners in the area, during, for instance, Varuna, Shakti with India, Garuda Guerrier and Super Garuda with Indonesia, and some multilateral activities, Lapéroule, Balikatan, RIMPAC, Pitch Black, Talisman Cyber Exercise, etc. France is though particularly exposed to hybrid strategies and threats, especially in its overseas territory. Faced with the proliferation of asymmetric threats in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly cyber attack and interference attempts, France is developing partnerships, namely in the field of cybersecurity. The ANSI, our National Agency for Cybersecurity, joined the Pacific Cyber Security Operational Network, PACSON. Interministerial and operational cooperation have been experimented with countries of the region, India, Japan, US, Singapore, Republic of Korea, etc. And France supports then the setting up of national cybersecurity center in India and Indonesia, for instance, with a specific training centers for the Pacific Island countries in addition. And then as a European country, for this fully supporting the European Union's assertion as a leading political actor and security provider in this region. The initiative EZIWA was mentioned by Secretary Agnew, but we can also mention the Global Port Security Initiative and some of the maritime security operations run by the European Union here in the region. Let's come with my third and last message. Faced with evolving international challenges and the changing strategic environments, France has updated its Indo-Pacific strategy and National Strategic Review. So the National Strategic Review was published, updated in July 25, and the Indo-Pacific strategy was updated, I think it was in June, after President Macron opening a speech in the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The French Indo-Pacific strategy has been updated, so in June 25, in order to take into account the most recent security developments and the fast-moving changes in this area. These changes are part of a profound shift in the global strategic environment affecting both Europe and the Indo-Pacific. The accelerating US-China competition with the Indo-Pacific at its epicenter. Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine and regional knockoff effects modifying political and diplomatic lines. Crisis in the Middle East that we just mentioned. And spillover risk in the northeast of Indian Ocean impacting the global trade and the global flows. In our national strategic review, 4 main axes have been outlined. The first one is protect and defend mainland and overseas France and its citizens. 2, defending Europe. 3, guarantee security and defending national interests and those of extra-European allies and partners. 4, actively contribute to the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. There we are. And if I come to the Indo-Pacific strategy, 4 axes are drawn to enhance these national strategic efforts. First, strengthen the French overseas territories' resilience, connectivity, hybrid threats, and resilience. 2, guarantee security and defend national interests and those of extra-European allies and partners. 3, support multilateralism and regional organization. And 4, support the implementation of the European Union Indo-Pacific strategy. So France reiterates its willingness to reject the logic of bloc, opting instead for a non-confrontational partnership-based approach. We believe in an offer sovereignty partnership between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Then, seeking a robust and diversified network of partners and support point in the Indo-Pacific remains essential to France's sovereign interests. That is why France's engagements has always been guided by its will to remain a trusted allies and partners and develop and fuel a strategic partnership. To conclude, France's defense and security action in the Indo-Pacific always aim to bring European and Indo-Pacific partners together and to promote enhanced cooperation in a variety of fields, including asymmetric threats, in a new model of competition, sometimes confrontation area, which are all together. I sincerely believe that identifying these threats and addressing them effectively at the regional level can only be achieved through collaboration and joint action. That is why I'm glad that this conference provides a unique opportunity of exchange, dialogue, sharing of perception, and trust building between partners. As outlined in the conclusion of the ECFR's paper, it is only by monitoring asymmetric threats jointly in the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific theaters that we'll be able to effectively bridge resilience and stability and act together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Admiral. All right. Before we proceed, may we invite the Admiral back on stage, please, together with Professor Manhit, Mr. Crabtree, and Secretary Anyan, also Ambassador Fontanel, for a quick photo opportunity, please. All right. Once again, thank you very much to our keynote speakers for this morning. Let's give them another round of applause, please. All right. And before we proceed to our first panel for this morning, allow me to recognize again some additional special guests that we have today. We have Lieutenant General Michael Lee, Deputy Head of Mission of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in the Philippines. Oh, there. All right. And we also have Captain Chandra Kothari, Defense Attaché of the Embassy of India. And we also have Ms. Lauren Vessel, Political Officer, Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. All right. All right, thank you very much for joining us this morning. So we now move on to the first panel of our forum, wherein we will discuss the security environment among the United States, Indo-Pacific, and Europe. Under the new Trump administration, shifting U.S. security policies are creating uncertainty for traditional alliances, with ripple effects across the Indo-Pacific and Europe. Now, this panel will explore these implications, how they are viewed by allies and partners, and the role of Europe in working with Indo-Pacific countries to strengthen cooperation in this evolving security landscape. And to begin today's discussions, we have with us a senior research fellow from the National Security College of the Australian National University. Please welcome Dr. Frederick Graer.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the organizers to have me with you today. It's a great honor. I have 7 minutes, and in 7 minutes I will certainly not do justice to the topic. Moreover, I don't know what has not been said, unsaid, and re-said again about the Trump administration policies. And it's an understatement to say that Trump 2.0 policies have generated discomfort, even though reaction differed from region to region. But if I had to sum up the argument, or my argument at least, I would say that cooperating in defense with the US today is like buying an insurance policy whose price would have suddenly increased, guarantees diminished, and uncertainty that the guarantee would even be delivered disappeared. So the problem is that we still need the insurance policy. So we are in that sort of dilemma constantly, and that's where we have to find ways to do things. I mean, if we look at, if we look at what the administration has done so far, I mean, it would be exaggerated to say that the Trump administration has changed anything in real terms to the security situation, be it in Europe or in Asia. Putin didn't wait for Trump to invade Crimea in 2014, and he didn't ask Trump for permission before he did invade the rest of Ukraine in 2022. Nor has Trump changed the policy in Asia itself per se. What the Trump administration has done is completely unsettled its own ally. So we have had a version of that in the past. We had at the MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction, which was supposed to be the ultimate deterrent, but it was the ultimate deterrent for the enemy. Today we have sort of a SAD, that is self-assured destruction, because what the policy is actually doing is creating uncertainty for US own allies, which is slightly less understandable. What we have seen so far is a willingness, and I quote, to reorient toward deterring aggression by Communist China. I'm quoting Secretary X said in the Shangri-La dialogue. This has been the rationale so far to try to disengage from Europe, but this has so far provided no additional guarantees in Asia itself. Yes, we have seen the US announcing the deployment of additional warships here in the Philippines, about the Scarborough Shoals. But we have also seen signs elsewhere, and I'm referring to Taipei and the reshoring of the semiconductor industry, which indicate that the importance of Taipei for the United States may have in reality diminished when, despite the narrative which still say, well, the US will come to the rescue of Taiwan. Now, there has been also a demand to substantially increase defense spending up to 5%, preferably, of course, by buying American equipment and assume greater responsibility. Let me say, as a French citizen, not an Australian one, that I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, France has been for decades, not months, not years, decades, trying to convince its European partners to invest more in their own defense. Unsuccessfully, to be honest, but yet, on principle at least, there is no difficulty with that. The irony is that it comes with the imposition of tariff all over in the name of, and I quote again, fairer trade deals that protects Americans while providing a lasting, secure basis for commerce. Somebody will have to explain me how those tariffs provide a lasting and secure basis for commerce and how it will help US allies buy more US equipment. I mean, I'm trying to be just very practical here. When on top of it, there is already uncertainty regarding US capacities to build whatever is required by the demand. And whoever lives in Australia will understand what I mean by that. But it is not limited to submarines. The reluctance to spend on foreign aid is another element of that. We've seen a drastic downsizing of the US Agency for International Development. Let me just give you a series of data coming directly from the US State Department. Minus 96% for Myanmar, minus 94 Indonesia, Vietnam minus 92, Thailand minus 81, and so on and so forth. Somebody again will have to explain me how this is likely to help diminish China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. But what has unsettled the European even more is the intent to substitute the US-EU relationship by a series of bilateral and totally asymmetrical relations in which the US would inevitably prevail thanks to the asymmetry of the relationship. Hence J.D. Vance's systematic support to the European far-right movement, because this is probably the best way to dismantle, if not destroy, the EU. Well, I will not, since I'm already told that I have only 2 minutes left, how can we go about that? I mean, a lot have been said already. I think there are two major ways. I mean, we are not capable alone to address the broad strategic issue, namely China. We are not necessarily collectively altogether capable of doing the same, because Asymmetry is something very, very difficult to deal with, very difficult to manage, and so on and so forth. So one of the ways which will not solve the issue, but will help restrict the space in which our adversaries, let's say, or can operate, is to try to diminish this space and to perhaps start working with unilateral and thematic coalition of the willing and able. This is a way to develop our own version of the salami slicing strategies that China has been using for decades. We don't solve the issue, we solve one specific problem, wherever we can with whoever is willing to do so. The idea is that such coalitions fix their attention on one specific topic, that are open to any actor and that can contribute to the objective. Clearly, this is not anti-American. Clearly, this is inclusive. But the price we'll have to pay for that is likely to be increasingly higher, and the relationship increasingly transactional. So this is something we do by ourselves, in which the US can be there, can even be the more important partner, but yet is not the only partner, and in which we can achieve things. The second thing, and this is important because of the nature of the threat we're facing. We're not facing exclusively a military threat. We're facing a series of hybrid threats. This is the theme of this conference today. We're facing gray zone. We're facing hybrid threat. We're facing also a world in which we can speak of the weaponization of everything, to quote the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs. The second aspect of it, since everything, and that will be my last point, I promise, since everything is also related to the economic environment in which we're operating, is to develop stronger linkage between the EU and the CPTPP. Interestingly, this is an idea that the ECFR developed a few years ago, as early as 2020. This is an idea that had been talked about by French President Emmanuel Macron at the La Shangri-La Dialogue, and this is something which needs to be developed. I mean, the fragmentation of the trading system could further foster the preying of larger power and smaller ones. This is exactly what we're facing right now. Hence the need for Europe and Asia to work together on a coalition of independence capable of resisting the spheres of coercion, to use the term of Emmanuel Macron. And let me say that with a combined GDP greater than China's, I insist, greater than China's, the EU has the capacity to be an economic anchor for the region, offering additional possibilities for diversification, export opportunities, and so on and so forth. I fully understand that this is easier said than done, but it may ultimately be one of the few ways in the present circumstances to preserve some capacity, I insist on some capacity, to manage great power competition in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for a very insightful speech, Dr. Grar. Up next to share his insights is Dr. Renato De Castro, trustee and program convener and non-resident fellow at the Strat-Base Institute. Dr. De Castro is also a professor at the International Studies Department of the De La Salle University. Let's all give him a round of applause, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start my presentation, let me express my appreciation to my colleague and, of course, my advisor in the Strat-Base, Professor Dindo Manhit, for giving me a chance to be here from Taipei. So let me start my presentation by quoting a European in describing the United States as an extremely lucky country. You know, way back going to Chancellor Otto von Bismarck when he said, the United States is a lucky country. It has weak neighbors in the north and in the south, east and west, you have fish. And this has basically been used by the United States in terms of what we call prioritization. American access both to the Atlantic and the Pacific had given it basically an opportunity to look at the world in terms of which is important at this given point in time. Will it be Euro-Atlantic or will it be the Indo-Pacific? You know, in terms of the Philippines, we could still remember when our President Manuel Quezon, when, you know, the siege of Corregidor, when he was shouting, bemoaning, Why is the United States giving importance to the Europe First policy during the onset of the Pacific War? So let me start. So we see this happening. I'll try to be fast. I have some PowerPoint presentation. So we have, of course, seeing it, efforts by Donald Trump to basically disengage from Europe. We saw this. Pursuing a peace deal with Russia at the expense. We were watching it in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, in Ukraine and U.S. NATO allies in the Indo-Pacific, when Vice President Vance told in the Munich Security Conference, we're shifting, we're dropping everything in Europe. Disparaging comments about key U.S. allies, specifically, of course, in the Euro-Atlantic, not so much in the Indo-Pacific. And, of course, asking Europeans to increase your defense budget to 5%. Threatening U.S. allies and NATO about the withdrawal of American troops from Europe. Abrogation of the very core of the American alliance system. Of course, we have two types. You have the NATO multilateral system. Here in the region, we have, of course, the hub-and-spoke system, or sometimes we call the San Francisco system of bilateral alliances, extremely disparaging to what is always perceived as the core of the American alliance system, NATO and the Washington Treaty of 1949. Then, of course, imposing tariffs, so forth and so on. I did not discuss this. It's another matter. China, of course, being targeted. Then, of course, Hexet visit that, the United States will be claiming again the Panama Canal. What's the significance of the Panama Canal? We go back at the beginning of the 20th century when at the time the United States Navy started to realize it had to build a two-ocean navy. And the only way that the United States could basically effect a two-ocean navy would be, of course, the building of the Panama Canal. Trump administration, China is growing involved in the management of the Panama Canal. But what it became very apparent would be, of course, the priority of the United States, shifting the priority away from the traditional Euro-Atlantic Indo-Pacific, which became very apparent during the speech of Secretary Hexet, when, of course, he went to Hawaii, in Honolulu, at the Danielle Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies. And, of course, the 2005 Annual Threat Assessment points out that China stands out as the most capable threatening the United States globally. Then, of course, when he visited, Secretary Hexet visited Manila, and he basically impressed upon us the concern is the Indo-Pacific. The concern is China. Ideally, we could deter China, but if push comes to shove, he basically talked about prevailing, in a very diplomatic term, the possibility of war fighting in the Indo-Pacific. Hexet announced also upgrading the U.S. forces in Japan after, of course, the Japanese self-defense force formed the Strategic Command. Eventually, of course, the Strategic Command became integrated to Indo-PACOM. It's not an administrative command, it's a combat command. Meaning, of course, at a given point in time, the Japanese self-defense force will be under the direct jurisdiction of Indo-PACOM in Hawaii. And I think the Armed Forces of the Philippines is also thinking in terms of building a strategic command. U.S. force, of course, let me just remove this. So U.S. forces, of course, will take over the Japanese self-defense force. Deployment of 20 B-2 stealth bombers, carrier battle groups being deployed here. Internal DOD memo, of course, labeled the Interim National Defense Strategic Guidance, which, of course, prepared the United States for a possible war against China. Of course, the document reorients U.S. military to prioritize deterring China's seizure, of course, of our closest neighbor, and that's Taiwan. So priority then. Document guides direct the U.S. military and American allies by providing extraordinary description of the potential invasion of Taiwan, exclusive animating scenario that must prioritize over other potential dangers. So again, the announcement of increasing the defense budget, but how could you basically increase the defense budget when you have, of course, a lot of tax breaks? So the only solution, of course, be tariff. Increasing U.S. defense budget, they're asking us to increase our defense budget by 5%, but of course, they're also increasing their defense budget by 12%. It would come, of course, savings fund overall, just precedent. So I'll just go directly to my point. What we're seeing right now is the focus or the prioritization towards a possible Taiwan scenario. And of course, this is very relevant to us because Taiwan is our closest neighbor. We could still remember how we were attacked by the Japanese Imperial Army at the onset of the Pacific War. So again, I'll focus on this. The DoD Interim National Defense Strategic Guidelines, largely based, of course, on the research of the conservative think tank, which of course very close to the Republicans, about the notion of prioritization imperative, a strategy to defend America's interests. In a more dangerous word, Heritage Foundation reports provide a pessimistic view, sentiment that the United States military could not anymore handle a two-front war. Gone are the days, of course, of the Cold War, when the United States would fight first in Europe, then, of course, focus on Asia Pacific. The notion of horizontal escalation only as a secondary theater during the Reagan administration. But the priority was a major land conflict in, of course, Central Europe. I still remember East and West Germany. This is because, of course, the US military is designed to fight and win only one major war at a given point in time. Gone were the days, of course, immediately after the end of the Cold War during the Clinton administration, when they would talk about fighting war first, then, of course, stand up, no more. Of course, currently in other regions, the US should empower allies and partners to lead efforts to defend against other regional challenges to American interests, and of course, Russia, Iran, North Korea. But of course, the Heritage Foundation emphasized the concept of prioritization. In operational terms, the US must focus its limited forces when they're needed most, consistent in American interests while strengthening allied partners, but burden sharing area. This is not new. We could still remember, of course, during the onset of the Second World War, Europe First policy. All efforts would be given, of course, to defeating Germany and then focusing on Asia. Prioritization is seen as difficult, of course, for US allies, especially if you are the one that has been given less priority. The same anguish that the Filipinos felt when, of course, the priority was given in Europe, while, of course, American forces were cut off in Bataan and Corridor. Considered better option to take, prioritization lead to a strategy of selective defense that focuses on the security of the US homeland, denies China its imperial ambition in the Indo-Pacific, and urgently, of course, preventing Beijing from undertaking its historic task of armed unification with Taiwan. The US can only focus its armed forces on defending the American homeland, denying China's, most urgently deterring Beijing, of course, from invading Taiwan, and offering the president credible option, of course, if there's a need to use force against possible Chinese invasion. American military power is key to any effort to deny China's imperial invasion in the Pacific. But of course, the US must prepare for a large-scale war in the Indo-Pacific with a specific focus on Taiwan. US must focus on surge investment, focusing all American forces on one theater, while of course expecting allies to do the fighting in the less priority. US must sustain efforts to regional allies, including Japan, Australia, the Philippines, to strengthen their defense. Australia and Japan were kind of hesitant. Recently, of course, our president announced in India that if you have a conflict in Taiwan, the Philippines will inevitably be dragged. Again, it is a matter of the tyranny of distance, the tyranny of geography. We're the closest to Taiwan. We are a treaty ally of the United States. So we see Balikatan exercises being conducted here under what we call full battle simulation. So this is a conclusion. I know, running out, okay. I'll wrap up. Trump administration current policy continues the major shift in the US-China relation that actually began during the Trump administration. The strategic competition against China began during the Trump administration. What was the implication of this? Basically removing any notion that started during the period of Nixon and Kissinger up to the Obama administration that China could be a responsible stakeholder. No. It's looking at the lens that China is a competitor. China could also be, of course, the other party in a major armed conflict here in the, it's not gray zone. It's actual conflict. Trump's administration current policy towards China indicate that Washington is not expected to retreat from its hardline posture towards Beijing in the near future. Again, this is more of a reflection, the fact that the United States has losing its strategic parity vis-a-vis China. The United States Navy, it's aware that it's not anymore the largest Navy in the world. The United States, more importantly, is very much aware that it doesn't have anymore the largest shipbuilding capacity. It does not anymore have the capacity, going back to the history of Europe, to win that, the Battle of the Atlantic. The Liberty ships, the escort carriers, the convoys that were, of course, enabled America and Europe to be connected, effecting, of course, the June 6, 1944 D-Day invasion. That could not happen again, simply because American shipbuilding capacity has already been surpassed by China. It has to ask the South Koreans to build a shipyard here in the Philippines. American national security, not economic nor trade, is now the primary factor shaping U.S. policy towards China and, of course, the world. This is recognition that the relative power gap between the U.S. and China has narrowed. The perception here is, in fact, China simply has the number. China simply has, of course, the geographic advantage to basically take control of the waters of the first island chain. Countries, of course, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and of course, between them, the waters of the first island chain that could be off limits to the United States 7th Fleet in the near future. There's now a stark acceptance in Washington that deterring Beijing might fail. They might not even win a major conflict against China because of the fact that the United States would have to focus elsewhere. China could simply focus in this part of the world. China basically has the number, and it could basically focus all its attention and efforts in one theater here in the waters of the first island chain, specifically targeting our closest neighbor, Taiwan. So there's a sense of urgency to deploy more forces in the Indo-Pacific, the ocean surge, train forward deployed forces for combat, deploy for strategic capabilities, foster closer relations with allies, especially here in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and hopefully South Korea. A Trump administration strategy is to deter China in its irredentist agenda over Taiwan through a policy of peace through strength, but if it fails, of course, the possibility of armed conflict. However, if deterrence failed, the U.S. prepared to fight China in a large-scale war over Taiwan. And this is a reality that way, especially here in the Philippines, being the closest neighbor to Taiwan. I think I end my presentation here. Thank you very much for allowing me to exceed my allotted time. I look forward to an interesting discussion later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renato De Castro, for a comprehensive presentation, considering the short amount of time allotted. All right, now we proceed to our last speaker for this panel. We have Professor of International Relations at the Japan National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Yoko Iwama.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's actually my first visit to the Philippines. Although it's our direct neighbor, I should come here more, but recently I find myself more and more in Asian countries, and I think it just shows the direction that we are going, that we are closely networking with our neighbors. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are on a 2-day visit in UK currently. They are the first US president to receive the honor of second state visit. The British royal family are putting up the best pomp they can to receive the pair, but there seems to be many protesters outside in London and in Windsor. For me, this seems to somehow symbolize the nature of the difficulties that we're facing as US partners. 5 months ago, on 5th of April 2025, the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, wrote an article in the British paper Telegraph, in which he wrote, "First, it was security and national defense. Now it is the global economy and trade. Old assumptions can no longer be taken for granted. The world as we knew it has gone. The new world is less governed by established rules and more by deals and alliances." It was 14th of February at the Munich Security Conference that Vice President J.D. Vance gave his memorable speech. It was 2nd of April when President Trump revealed his extensive tariff plans and called it the Liberation Day. When I saw this table of tariffs that President Trump had shown, it was the morning of the 3rd of April in Japan. It immediately reminded me of what happened in the 1930s during the Great Depression. The image of the world plunging into another Great Depression was so depressing for me that that morning I went back to bed and could not get up for several hours. It has been 5 months since then, and the world has not yet disintegrated. What have we learned in these 5 months? I think we have come quite a long way since Prime Minister Sharma wrote his article in April. Of course, it is not the world as we have known it, but rather the world we thought we had known that is winning. The world is affected by the challenges that the US, Russia, China, and others are posing us, but it has not disintegrated yet, it has not disappeared. The rules and multilateralism are indeed under serious threat, but it has not collapsed. If we look back and think deeper, we will realize that in the past 80 years since the end of the Second World War, it had never been easy to build and sustain the rule-based order. We tend to idealize and glorify what existed in the past. In reality, the world was always difficult. New challenges seemed always harder than the ones we had known. And the United States and other great powers always had its flaws and selfishness. We have seen the many faces of the United States, especially here in Asia. Nobody knows it better than the Philippines. The Philippines suffered under a series of imperialisms, and the island still bears its scars. That includes the Spanish, the US, and of course, us Japanese. So the twists and turns in US politics, especially its foreign policy, may be less surprising if you take a little bit longer view of history. As for communicating with Trump administration, we have learned in the passing months that some things matter more than the others, and that they are open to negotiations and deals. So the governments are adapting and trying to come up with ways to deal with the new challenges. And what's going on currently in UK is just one aspect of that effort. The old world as we have known it is not gone. It is certainly under threat and is seriously challenged, but it has not gone yet. The United Nations is still there, NATO is still there, the Japan-US alliance is still there. The US is paying much less attention to these institutions and is much less willing to bear the burden. But again, Asian partners know much better than the Europeans that the Americans' guarantees were never for free. There were always price tags attached, sometimes very high, and we have continued to pay them. We must not let rule-based order collapse, and there are many things we can do to prevent it, both in economic and defense and security terms. The global institutions will be unstable, but not entirely gone, and we must do more to support them. There will be more minilaterals, regionals, and networks, both in economy and trade, defense, and security. At times, the US may not play a role. They may not play as big a role as they used to in many. But the last several months have also been a learning process of how indispensable the United States is for all of us. And so we must all adapt to the new world in which all our roles are changing. We must try to make networks and new institutions in order to safeguard the rule-based international order. And when it comes to security and defense, these institutions and networks must function in order to secure both deterrence and engagement. And it is probably not the Trump administration. The long-term tendency of the relative decline of the American power in the world was evident over decades. We simply managed to push it out of our consciousness and pretended that it was not happening. The arrival of the Trump administration was probably the moment of truth when we were pressed to face this fact. The world as we have known it is not entirely gone, it is changed, it is under threat, but it does not mean that we give up the rule-based international orders. The order's nature will be different, some rules will be rewritten, and members may vary, but that is not its total collapse. We must not over-dramatize the situation and do our best. I often think about the first 4 decades of the 20th century these days. But Asia was very different in those days. We need not repeat the experience of the 1930s. Many Europeans were colonial powers. America was also a colonial power, and Japan also became a military expansionist power, believing that military power will somehow bring stability, but that was an illusion. We live in a totally different world now. All the Asian countries that used to be object of colonialism and imperialism are now independent, sovereign countries, important and subjective actors in their own right. That is the foundation of the order we must build in this region. I think very typical of the new age, that we gather here in Manila to discuss the challenges that we face. Above all, I believe that we must do our homework at home. Many of our countries, including mine, Japan, is suffering under unstable political leadership. I think it is a reflection of social divide, unaddressed dissatisfactions in society, and the failure of our leadership to deal with these problems. So the global peace starts at home, and we, all of us, must work hard to strengthen our institutions and the society at home. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Yoko Iwama. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have questions that you wish to ask to our speakers. So we will be hearing more from them during our panel discussion. So may we invite back on stage our speakers for this morning, Dr. Frederick Grar and Dr. Renato De Castro, and also Dr. Yoko Iwama. Now, this panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Regina Lay, a business and economic news editor and news anchor in Signal TV's One News, and also a fellow of the East-West Center's Jefferson Fellowship. Let's give them a round of applause, please.
Hi there. I'm honored to be moderating this panel, but the first thing I will say is I'm not a security expert by any stretch of the imagination, and so I apologize in advance if this is not as highbrow as we'd like, but I will do my best. Sorry, I was having coffee at the back when I got called. The title of our panel is Trump 2.0 and the new security environment. So the first thing in my mind is, what is this new security environment? Could one of you guys define it for us? Dr. Gregg, you want to go?
Well, this is a security environment in which security is no longer the main element, or more precisely, where the military thing is, of course, very important, at the same time, not necessarily as central as it used to be. And that changes everything. Because this is one thing to say you have to rearm this, to do this and that, in which you can compare also the quality of different systems and so on, and try to develop a security when everything is actually weaponized. This is not my saying, this is an expression that I said in the presentation, the Indian Foreign Minister. And I think that nothing can characterize the current situation more than this expression, the weaponization of everything from trade, and starting eventually with trade, which condition a lot of everything else, going to things as innocuous at face value as fisheries, for example. Who would have thought a few years ago that fishing policy would be a main tool of influence, that would be a way to assert sovereignty, rightly or wrongly, over vast areas of the current sea. I mean, we are in the South China Sea, this is the Philippines, so clearly you understand what I'm talking about. So everything is currently changing. This is what we're facing now. Now it does open also new opportunity, and that's part of the new security environment, because it means that when you were speaking strictly of military assets, then Europe was not really a player. It still had, and had for a long time actually, the second combined military budget in the world. Much above China. But at the same time, no one would have taken seriously the pretend that Europe would intervene as a major security actor in the region. If you speak of every threat, if you speak of everything, that's changing the perspective completely.
Right.
Because there you can speak of each and every category of threat and address them separately in whatever combined things we can have.
Right, right.
So there we are.
Dr. De Castro was shaking his head, but if you don't mind, may I give the floor to Dr. Iwama first, the lady?
Oh.
Did you want to weigh in?
What's new about the Trump research? I think it's, I totally agree about the weaponization and everything. In addition, I think a lot of us question the commitment, the American commitment, the strength of American guarantee. We question it, and that's, you know, that's new. I think we question it first of all in Europe, but when the Europeans question it, then the Asians question it. Can we really trust the American guarantee, the American extended deterrence? So I think that's kind of, it feels new, right?
That part does feel new. Do you disagree, Dr. De Castro? Is that why you're shaking your head?
Well, of course, the changes had been happening for some time. But if you want a visible indication of that change, go back to September 3, 2025, go to Beijing, and you see the march. You see the march of the PLA. 50,000 of them showing their might. Then, of course, you have the picture with President Putin, President Xi Jinping, and, of course, Kim. What has basically changed is you have a direct challenge to an international order that we assume is given since, of course, the end of the Second World War. You have the combination, of course, of the military power of Russia in terms of continental, then, of course, the comprehensive power of China. Fact that, you know, in a way, it's more dangerous than the Cold War, because during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was a military power, but it was never an economic power. I could still remember the saying then. The Soviet Union had a first world military, but had a third world economy. Now it's a totally different ballgame. China both has a first world military and, of course, a first world economy. And for us in the Philippines and Taiwan, it's right in our neighborhood. So whereas the flashpoint before, during the Cold War, was in Central Europe, now the flashpoint is in our parts in the Indo-Pacific. That has changed everything.
So you look at that picture and you think that is the new global order.
And it's not yet. The change about it is the global order is changing. What is basically alarming is we're seeing a process of where this order would basically evolve. What is clear is that the global order that we used to take for granted since the end of the Second World War is undergoing a major change. How that change would emerge would, of course, be a question. I would like to quote a scholar, a British scholar that I really admire, who made this work in September 1939. I'm talking about E.H. Carr. Well, it's 1939, Germany just invaded Poland. So what will be the nature of the global order? Would it be in a matter of evolution, or it will be a case of what E.H. Carr would call, it will be tested to what we call the ultima ratio of international relations, a major conflict among the great powers.
Yeah, a sudden event.
Yeah.
That's actually what I was going to go towards, which is that it's 9 months now of the Trump second administration, and we've figured out a few things by now. We know a few things by now. We know he doesn't like the rules-based international order. He doesn't like global institutions, right? We know that he looks at alliances very much transactionally. We know that he changes his mind a lot. The question is, have these allied countries figured that out? Or is there still a sense that they're thinking, okay, we could ride this administration out?
No one will drive the administration out. I mean, this is the big debate of the moment. Is Trump an epiphenomenon, and then we have to wait and bide our time and so on and so forth, or are we facing a fundamental change? I mean, we don't know actually. We don't know what the Trump administration does really want. There are clearly some serious conflict within it, including on the question of China. We don't know what the administration will ultimately do, because this is one thing to say we want to disengage from Europe, and this is another one to actually disengage from Europe, which makes a big, big, big difference. What will have changed anyway is the level of confidence in what this administration does and will do in the future. And this is a completely different scenario than the one we used to face, when there was, we don't have to idealize the past international order, which was as much an international disorder than anything else, but at least there was a relative degree of confidence in the alliance, no matter how complicated individual bilateral relation may have been within it. Now, this has completely disappeared. I mean, we are facing a systematic attempt by part of the administration to disintegrate Europe. I mean, the reason why they support far-right movement right now is linked to that, because once they are in Brussels, then the deconstruction will start from within. Whatever they may say outside, because population are attached to the concept, then that changing completely our relationship with the United States. So far, we've resisted quite efficiently. But so far, we don't know where things are going to go.
Dr. Iwama, you were laughing. Please.
Yeah. Will we write this administration out? Well, we have to try, but I think that's kind of irrelevant, because I think this is a long-term phenomenon that we faced with the decline of the US power relatively in the world. On the other hand, I disagree with Dr. De Castro that we're in a much more difficult situation than during the Cold War. The challenge that the Soviet Union imposed us was ideological. They believed to offer a different vision of the world and a different vision of how to organize a society. And it was attractive for a lot of people on this globe, and especially for the newly independent becoming states. Currently, whatever coalition you have, China, Russia, North Korea, they do not offer such an attractive alternative vision of the world or of a society. I mean, a lot of people would rather live here than in North Korea, probably. So I think that the nature of challenge is different, and I think this one is much more manageable than the Cold War if we all act united and wisely.
Clearly, you disagree that the Soviet Union proposition was just
well,
ideological.
I was old enough to go to East Germany, and I saw Soviet tanks right across the Elbe. So I really saw Soviet military. Of course, Japan also had its share of being intimidated by the Soviet Pacific Fleet. During that, I'm operating from the Vladivostok. At that time, the Soviets deployed 2 carriers here. And Minsk, of course, and we could still remember here in the Philippines, we saw Soviet forces across South China Sea in Cam Bay. So my take, of course, is the Soviet Union also presented a credible military threat. But of course, my point is China now is more dangerous, in fact, than the Soviet. What does the United States want? It's clear how the Trump administration changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War.
I was just going to bring
basically
that up.
preparing.
Right.
Now, regarding alliances, we tend, especially in Europe, you tend to romanticize the alliance, looking at it in terms of alliance of choice. That we are allies because we're liberal democracies, we share common values. But in the end, at the end of the day, alliances are actually transactional relationship. You form alliances not because you like each other, but because you're confronted with a greater threat. Alliances is a matter of necessity, not of choice. And the Trump administration is basically telling us the real element of alliance is utilitarian, it's transactional, it is based on a matter of choice, not because we like each other, but because we are confronted with a greater threat. That's the very essence of alliance in its old classical sense. Especially in Europe, of course, NATO tend to romanticize this. Here in the Indo-Pacific, in the hub and spoke system, this is something that we have basically accepted. The world is not fair. We have to have an ally, not because we like it, but because we don't like somebody more, and that's, of course, China.
There are such things as ideological alliances, though, as geographical alliances.
Just looking at the Second World War, ideological alliances didn't matter. Churchill basically embraced Stalin after, of course, Operation Barbarossa. You remember what Churchill said? I've said a lot of bad things about the devil, but if Hitler would go to hell, I would say positive things about the devil in the parliament. So that basically defeats the notion of such a thing as ideological alliances. That's my take.
Okay, let's bring it back to the new security environment. And you know, when you think about how Trump came to power again, and you think about the overwhelming mandate that he won, and you think about the fact that he won the popular vote for the first time, that kind of signals that this is the direction that America wants to go. This is not partisan anymore, right? And maybe the question there for the Philippine government is there enough awareness and acceptance of that, that this is going to be the new way forward for the Philippines?
Well, we have dealt with the United States ever since Admiral Dewey entered Manila Bay in 1898. But again, you have to look at the American system. I have a check and balance at this point in time. Probably you have that balance being upset by the fact that the Republicans or the MAGA controlled the Congress and, of course, the executive. Let's wait for the midterm election. You already have, of course, backlash happening. Plus, of course, at the end of the day, Trump will be there only for 4 years.
Dr. Greer.
I think there are other factors considered, but this question is very much underlying the whole debate as to what we should do with the Trump administration. Bide our time or look for some other reason.
Right, because it defines your answer.
We do have a population which is telling its leadership, we don't want any stupid wars anymore.
Sorry, Dr. Gregg, could you move the mic closer?
Sorry. We do have an American population which told its leadership, we don't want wars anymore, right? And we do have an American establishment which is very hawkish, very anti-China and so on. And we actually don't know where this is going to go. I mean, if you listen to Donald Trump himself, you have one direction. If he can avoid war at any cost, he will probably do so. Now, that's a very serious question as to the reliability of the US as an ally in case of conflict. And that goes against every ideological position regarding China, and that even question the fundamentals of US national interest. Because if making a deal with China is the US national interest, that means that the definition of the US national interest has already changed. And that we don't know for sure yet. And depending on who we meet in Washington, D.C., then we get completely different situation. We get reassurances on exit sign, for example. Listen to a speech at the Shangri-La. And at the same time, we get indication that things may go completely in the opposite direction. So this is, you know, how can you be even transactional in such a situation? So in terms of policy making, apart from deciding that the more autonomy, the better, then you're in a bind because you don't know where to go.
You don't think its definition of self-national interest has already gotten narrower?
No, I don't know because he's been changing his mind so many times. It's only been 9 months. So things may change again quite a bit.
Right.
But I mean, again, look at the debate in DC, and you'll see that nothing is really decided for sure. And I'm not even talking of the external factor, which may prompt the administration one way or the other. This is one thing to say, I want this. This is another one to actually achieve it. I was mentioning disengaging from Europe earlier. What have we seen vis-à-vis China, for example? Not even in tariffs. There is a patience which is shown to China, which hasn't been shown to any of US partners so far. So this is the kind of reality that we have to consider when it comes to actual decision making.
Dr. Iwama, Dr. De Castro brought up the Department of War, the U.S. renaming its Defense Department that, and I mean, I don't even know if it's going to get past Congress at this point, but it's all part of the so-called warrior ethos framing that Secretary Hegseth is going for, right? What do we make of that? Is that just a symbolic thing, or is that signaling something bigger for the rest of the allied countries?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, symbolism matters a lot, and in times of such turbulence, I think politicians tend to make a lot more symbolism, and if that stays in that realm, it doesn't do much harm. I'm worried more about longer-term changes in the American and also developed countries, because I think Trump is not the cause, it's a result of the division of the society and the problems that the American society is facing. And we see it in Japan, we see it in France, we see it in Germany. I mean, the traditional middle class do not feel that they still have a place in the country and the democracy that they have. And it's a result of the change of the industry and how and the wealth is divided in its own country. So I think we're facing a sort of a, I don't know if it's a second or the third industrial revolution, and our politics need to adapt to that. If we fail, I think that's a far bigger problem than just you know, a symbolism of Department of War.
That's a great way to think of it. He's a result, not the cause. Dr. De Castro,
Okay,
yes.
let me explain the change, the implication of the change from the Department of Defense and Department of War. And again, the notion, let me address the notion of the reliability of the United States as an ally. First of all, why the change? You have to go back to what happened in 1947. The National Security Act of 1947, which of course created the Pentagon, the CIA, intelligence agency. This was of course looking at the Cold War. At the time it was evolving. It was neither peaceful nor of course conflictual. So they developed, the American political establishment created the notion of national security and of course defense. Because it's not war, because there's no actual conflict, but of course hostility from of course Stalin's Soviet Union. So they tried to address this notion of ambiguity, what we call the gray zone between war and peace, by coming out with that notion of national security and the Department of Defense. I don't know if President Trump is very much aware of that context, but he basically, by changing the Department of War, it seems that the United States is trying to move away from the notion that there's still a gray area. That's either peace or war, which of course was the original reason why you have the Department of War and of course the Department of Defense when they were formed at the early part of the Republic. Let me address the notion of the reliability of the United States.
Sorry. So the fact that we're going back to the 1940s lexicon, what does that mean for the rest of the country?
Again, my point is whether President Trump really understood the context of why it was changed from the Department of War to, of course, the Department, from the Department of War to the Department of Defense. Also, of course, the other there is the bureaucratic notion. Before you have the Department of War, but you only have one department, the Army, and of course the Department of the Navy. But of course during the Second World War, the Army and the Navy were fighting each other. So the solution there was of course the Pentagon, the Department of Defense. But I don't know again whether President Trump
Presumably, he would be advised well.
I don't know, or even Secretary Hegseth is aware of that historical context. Let me just address the notion of the reliability of the United States. I will argue the United States is still the most reliable ally, because I have two definitions when you talk about reliability. An ally is reliable because of two factors. Number one, material capability. Do you have the material capability to assist me in times of war? The other element, of course, is willingness. Will I provide you assistance, given the fact that if I assist you, I would put the lives of my soldiers, my sailors on harm's way. I would lose resources. So at this point in time, even China does not have the same military capability as the United States. Of course, what is basically lacking, we're questioning, is of course the willingness. Is the willingness still there? But at the end of the day, I would rely on an ally that seems to be unreliable because it lacks the will, but still have, of course, the capability. Because at the end of the day, capability would matter whether your ally is reliable or not.
But the willingness side of the equation is a very big question.
That could change.
Could change, exactly.
That could change. It takes time for capability to change. Willingness could change anytime.
Dr. Greer.
Well, again, it depends how you analyze the nature of the threat. If you speak strictly in military terms, yes, you're right, capabilities are still there. Although, yes, we do have to seriously question the willingness. But if you speak of a number of things which define the alliances, by the way, and which for a number of countries in the Indo-Pacific are much more important than military strength itself, then this is a completely different ballgame. I currently live in Australia. I mean, the big game here is in the South Pacific. Then in the South Pacific, this is not about how many aircraft carriers you do have in Fiji. That's irrelevant. Everybody speaks of, police force. Everybody speaks of climate change and so on and so forth, which are seen as much more important. And through that, countries has developed an influence policy. Then there on the US side, there is no willingness. Is there really capacities? Even before this administration, they were not very present. So true, Australia was doing the job for them, at least they were supposed to, and are actually trying to. But I mean, there we can ask about capacities there because, in front of them they have China. But we're not talking, you go to the Solomon Islands, which has been in the limelight for so long. I mean, this is not about military forces. This is not about aircraft carrier, destroyers or whatever in Guadalcanal. This is about something else. And this is the way things operate. So, capacities change according to what you're talking about.
This morning we heard a lot about the great opportunities for integration, better cooperation between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. But I want to home in a little bit on the practicalities on the ground. You mentioned, Dr. Iwama, a good point about the political landscape. So how have the domestic political issues influenced these regions' approach and response to Trump 2.0? In Japan, you're dealing with governance issues as well. There's the LDP governing with a small minority coalition. In Europe, there's how do I describe this? Fragmented landscape as well, right? It's not clear that you're speaking in one voice, and it's in the Philippines. It's Congress has lost the plot, let's just say. But in and amongst all of these domestic issues, how have that influenced the approach to Trump 2.0?
Definitely. I mean, Dr. De Castro spoke about capabilities and willingness, but these are capabilities and willingness on both sides, right? So we also have to provide capabilities, and it's a combination of our and American capabilities and how they kind of combine with each other, who does what in what situations, and how well thought out they are, that provides deterrence. And it's also the willingness on Japan's part to do more that would probably enhance the willingness on the American side to be more committed. So it really matters. But the domestic society is becoming more and more fragmented currently. And I think it's a reflection of the dissatisfaction, especially of the younger generation, of their future prospect in this country and in this region. And somehow we have to achieve a breakthrough there and give them more brighter perspectives about their future. And I don't really think Japan will achieve that nationally. That needs to be achieved regionally in combination with many other younger nations in the region. Although there are anti-foreigner sentiments much stronger in Japan, but I see no other way really. And so that's a very huge challenge that must be faced. And it's a real actual issue here in Japan as well.
And those same themes are actually also playing out over in Europe. So same question to you, Dr. Greer.
Same question, can you repeat?
Which is, domestic political issues. How have that affected the region's approach to the second Trump administration?
Well, just because there is a fragmentation of the social polity, there are also different approaches to whatever. There is part of the electorate, and this is the one that the Trump administration cultivates, which is very much in favor of what has been done elsewhere in America. And this party is very much aligned to whatever position. The problem is, once they will be actually in power, if they ever do, they'll be directly confronted with them, and they will go, come back as a boomerang in their face. Now, in terms of how is that a problem? It's a problem because that part of the electorate, and larger part of the electorate actually, does exactly not understand what you were talking about, is that capacity has to come from both sides. I mean, the French state has for years explained its partners, for example, that yes, we need to develop capacities. Yes, we need to intervene. I mean, the European strategy of the Indo-Pacific wouldn't exist hadn't it been for Paris' strong push for it.
Yeah.
Okay? For a long time, there was lip service paid in Europe to it. Gradually, countries came to understand what it meant. Now, try to explain that to the larger public, and you'll be at serious difficulties making people understand why it's necessary for Europe writ large to be present in the Indo-Pacific as well. Even if people do understand now much better than before that, yes, China might be a problem in their daily life.
Right. But that's exactly the point I was driving at. I mean, how do you sell it to a public? On the one hand, you have to beef up your defense spending. On the other hand, you have to convince them, okay, well, maybe it's time to project power out in the Indo-Pacific, right?
You know, it's not just the understanding, it's also what it means on a day-to-day basis. I remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, all of a sudden the price of energy rose up. The entire population was, all political parties had to change their stance vis-à-vis Russia because Russia was seen as the aggressor, including by their own electorate, by the way. A week later, the first demonstration against the price of oil started in the transport sectors and so on. So people's memories and consideration are extremely short, and we're fighting against that short span of attention as much as we are fighting against a sort of misunderstanding of the situation. People by and large understanding they still have to leave. They still have to buy oil. They still have to pay the bills by the end of the day. So, you know, that makes everything complicated. This is a problem that everybody faces.
Right.
So, and that's true for China as well in many ways.
Dr. De Castro, I'll let
Okay,
you have the last
let
word.
me just sidestep the question of political, but more so of what is to be done, given the fact that the United States politically is very unstable. We're required Indo-Pacific and Euro-Atlantic to engage in a conversation. We're all U.S. allies. We're faced with the same problem. The main challenge, of course, is not the United States. Although right now we see it as unreliable and suffering relative decline. the main challenge is the fact that we're confronted with what I call the Eurasian threat. The fact that we are facing an alignment between two very powerful Eurasian powers, China and Russia. It is basically Mackinder's nightmare going back to the 19th century. So we have to talk in terms of how we have to coordinate. We have to emphasize, and this is a point I raised when I was at the Global Security Forum in Prague early this year. The security of the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic is indivisible. What will happen in Ukraine will impact in the Indo-Pacific, especially in the first island chain. If Russia would succeed in Ukraine, China will have a model with effect, of course, its expansion into the first